Hello and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Biola University, ranked as the most comprehensively Christian university in North America. My name is Brian Perez, and we are live on this Thursday, the 14th of November, and we would love to chat with you at 888-564-6173. That being said, we're not going to take phone calls right away because we've got some chatting to do here in the studio. We've got Brian Brodersen, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa here, and Bobby Conway is joining us on Skype. Bobby's the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. And in the studio with us, well, this is amazing. I have heard so much about him. I have never met him, but he's here in the studio, so I finally get to meet Chuck Smith Jr. Yes, the son of Chuck Smith Sr. Chuck, it is so good to have you here. So nice meeting you, sir.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Brian Brodersen does a great Pastor Chuck Smith Sr. impersonation, so we could do Chuck and Chuck talking to. Yes. That would be interesting.
No, I can only do it when I have, remember I had that kind of that throat.
Oh, the laryngitis thing over there. Yes,
yeah, so
that's true.
That helped. But I'm surprised. I didn't know that you'd never met before.
No.
I mean, because you've been in the studio, but it has been a while.
It's been a while.
Yeah. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. But so one of the reasons we have Chuck here is because of an event that is going on this weekend. If you're here in Southern California, it's at the La Ventura Civic Center, or Event Center, I should say, in San Clemente. And you can get all the details about it online, but we're going to talk about it for a few minutes at least. It's called Helping Hands, and it's an art exhibit that features hand-drawn portraits made by children living in several war-torn cities of Ukraine. So, Chuck, how did you get involved with this?
Well, Steve Gumer, who is the CEO of Novi Community, has been a friend for years. He came to faith at Calvary Chapel in Las Vegas.
Oh, wow.
And he got to a place in his relationship with the Lord where he decided for himself and his life, normal was over. And that became a slogan. Normal is over. And when I asked him, when we first met, it's been a few years now, I said, well, give me an explanation of what that means. And he said, okay. He said, my dad worked for 40 years at a job he hated. When he retired, he lived for another 5 years and then died of cancer. And he said, to me, that's normal. It's a 9 to 5. And he said, I just didn't want to do it. And so he ended up marrying this wonderful Norwegian woman. And she also has just a deep heart and empathy for people suffering anywhere. And they began their work in Thailand in refugee camps for people who had fled from Burma and had suffered greatly. Many of them were Christians, especially those who belonged to the Karen ethnicity. In fact, the biggest population response to the gospel was among the Karen people, and that was years ago. But they were primed for it by their own mythology and background. When the missionaries arrived, they said, "Oh, this is the promise fulfilled," and they just opened their hearts to the Scripture. The missionaries who came, according to their myth, God was going to reconcile them to Himself, and the people He would send would have golden Bibles. And when they saw the gilded pages, the edge of the Bibles with gold pages, they said that's the golden book. So anyway, they worked for years in Thailand, and they've been in other areas of the world since then to supply relief. Once the war broke out in Ukraine, they were there immediately, going through Poland with truckloads of mattresses, food supplies, clothing for the Ukrainian people. And at some point, they began to notice that the children had needs. A lot of them had no affect in their facial expression. They were nonverbal. They, they'd pull away. Basically, their nervous systems were saying danger, danger, danger constantly.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, think about it. And we have soldiers who have come back to America from war, marked for the rest of their lives. They've experienced so much trauma that they've never been able to rematriculate back into North American society. And they have that reflex where it's unconscious. They don't need to hear an explosion and think about it and go, oh, I remember that from Vietnam or from Afghanistan or Iraq. It's in their nervous system. Our nervous system will memorize danger because, part of what happens in our brain stem is recognizing and cataloging dangerous events. So that's why the post-traumatic stress disorders, you don't have to consciously remember why you're running suddenly or breathing heavy or freaking out. Well, when we can see what that does in the lives of brave adult men, no wonder a child can be completely broken. Wow. And so they began looking at what they could do for the children. And they found a clinical psychologist here in the States who works specifically with childhood trauma from living in war zones. And he got really excited when they said, well, what can we do for these children? He said, I can help them. Let me go over there with you. And he's blind, but this is his life and his work. And so he took his own team with them, and they began working with children and then training adults there, teachers, other caregivers, parents, other therapists, how to work with them in games, in play, in conversations, and all kinds of activities. They have some really clever, creative things that you and I have never seen, unless we've seen how people work with children in trauma. It can begin with something as simple as rolling a ball to a child who is like a statue, and they just sort of push it back. And then they roll the ball back to them again, and they push it back. And in just a little bit, they're engaged, they're smiling. This one family came in to, stop me whenever you want, because I could go on and on with this. This one family came, and their son had not spoken in months, not said a word. And the parents, they don't know how to deal with this. So someone would say to their son, what's your name? Nothing. And the parents would give him a shove and say, tell him your name, tell him your name. And the more they'd insist, the more the child would clam up. And after a week in their program, this child was laughing, was playing with other kids, was talking to anyone.
And everybody knew his name.
And everybody knew his name. So it's that kind of thing when you see that. When I started to talk to Steve about their work, and he's telling me stories, I said, Steve, what you're doing is you are giving them their childhood. And he said, yes, that's exactly it. They've been robbed of their childhood. They've been thrown into an adult war that they have no business being there, but it's come to them. Now, these children sleep in bomb shelters every night. They hear the explosions. They feel the concussions of the bombs, and they don't know, will it be me?
Yeah.
It was my friend last week in the apartment across the street.
Yeah.
Will it be me tonight? And so to get them playing, to get them interacting, he said, when they see a child talking, interacting, playing, laughing with another child, they know that they're on the right track. If they see a child off by herself, not talking to anyone, not engaging, they say, we have work to do there. So it's a beautiful thing that they're doing. It's a wonderful thing. And Steve got in touch with me maybe 3 months ago. He said, I'm going to be back in California, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to set up an event where we can display artwork that these children do. Now, there's a whole process here. They explain to the children what they want to do, and they draw these portraits, and the ad says that they're life-size. They're actually larger than life. And they're drawing pictures of themselves, and then they're marking any place in their portrait on their bodies where they have feelings and describing what that feeling is and what they think about it. And this is a beginning of opening them up to what's actually going on inside of them and giving then those who are working with them, the adults, an idea of where to start, of where to go, of, how are we going to get into that? How are we going to address that and help them to address that so that it fits in their worldview. It fits in, their understanding of life. It has a place. It's not a buried memory. It's not a trauma that's forgotten. It's something that they are now able to work through. So so that's what we're doing at La Ventura. La Ventura is an event center in South San Clemente, and it just happens to be where we're meeting now. Story in itself, and so they're going to have several of these life-size portraits on stands. There'll be a couple of videos. One, as you come in to introduce what Novi community is doing in Ukraine, and then the others will be videos of a video of the children as they're making these projects, and you get to hear some of their responses and see what's going on. It's like what Steve wants is for people to see the effect of this work with the children and just how it works so that it helps them to deal with the crises in their lives right now.
So Novi is a non-governmental organization, an NGO. Their website, I mentioned that because that's part of their website. It's Novi, NOVI.NGO. So if you go there, you can find out more about the work that Novi does. You can make a donation. But this event that we're talking about, is happening this Sunday, November 17th at the La Ventura Event Center in San Clemente. You can get all the details on our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com. Click on events. Scroll down, you'll see it there, November 17th. All the events are in chronological order, so scroll down to find the one for the 17th. Admission is free, and you can see these portraits that our guest, Chuck Smith Jr., is telling us all about.
And if you happen to have any Ukrainian friends in Orange County, bring them.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Already we have refugees from Ukraine living here now, and a Ukrainian presence that's helping them to find jobs, to gain citizenship or at least visitor status, so that they've fled the war.
Yeah.
And there's a growing community of Ukrainians here. I had a really cool experience last week. A friend of mine who has been in ministry his whole adult life and now has dementia, he and I began meeting about 12 years ago every other week just to talk and to share. Now I go to his house every other week to visit with him and his wife. Last week when I got there, there was a caregiver there who had been with him all morning. And when I entered their living room, she stood up and they said, Chuck, this is Diana. She she was working with Pat today, and with this thick accent, she said, "I'm Ukrainian, and I have a degree in translation." And I said, I just got excited immediately. I said, "Wow, we're doing a special event regarding Ukrainian children and dealing with trauma." And then she got excited. She said, "Oh, can I come?" And I said, "Yes, come, bring friends.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I'll put you to work translating." And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and she was all over that. It's like, up until that moment, I've been, Lord, is anyone going to come to this thing? I mean, will it have the value that Steve hopes that it has? And that just seemed like confirmation to me that, yes, this is right. The timing is right. And so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and you're right about the numbers of Ukrainians that are in the area. So, and I know we have some Ukrainians in the church, so they're going to be absolutely thrilled about this. I just traveled to Cyprus with a guy in the church who's Ukrainian, and he travels a lot with us. He's in his 70s, and born in Ukraine, grew up in Connecticut, but still is so connected to Ukraine, So we're in Cyprus. He's meeting all these Ukrainians. Like, I met this Ukrainian person, that Ukrainian person. So his name is Myron, and I'm sure Myron will show up at the center on Sunday.
Well, of course, anywhere that we go in the world, if God should happen to move us somewhere else, we're always going to love America.
Yeah.
It's always going to be in our heart. So Ukraine will always be in their heart.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And, I don't know if you know this or not, Chuck, but when, so many Ukrainians came across the Mexican border and to San Diego, and the Calvary in San Diego became the stop for them. So literally thousands of them went through the church.
Wow.
They slept in the church. They were provided food for the church, and then and the church was working with the government. So the government was looking for ways to place them, but the church became sort of a stopover for them. So
that's so.
I was down there a couple of weeks ago with Phil Metzger, and he's the pastor of the church, and we're standing in this beautifully remodeled thing, and he says, "Yeah, this is," and he was showing us, "Yeah, these floors right here had just cots and sleeping bags and all of that," and I thought, wow, that's wonderful.
That is wonderful. I did not know that. That is exciting.
Yeah.
So again, you can find out more about this event. It's happening this Sunday. Go to our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com, click events, and then look for the Helping Hands art exhibit. Bobby Conway, I want to bring you on because you're kind of a budding artist in your 50s. You just recently started drawing, and your drawings are phenomenal, by the way. But when you hear stories like this of children who are expressing their pain, their anguish, they may not even know what they're expressing, but they're putting it on paper with pencils or crayons or whatever. What does that say to you?
I like what Chuck's sharing. I think this is super cool, because we've had a lot of kids that have been adopted from the Ukraine, and we've seen them in our church and the difficulties of them to emote. They just struggle with tremendous detachment. We've seen, just a lot of inability to emotionally connect. And I would say for me, I sit in Starbucks and I draw, but it's wonderful to watch the kids when I'm doing art pieces, because they will, if I'm reading a book, they could care less. But when they see a guy that looks like an old man to them drawing a character or something, and I had a little kid come up to me last week, and he was like, that's really cool. And I said, "You draw?" He said, I said, "Do you draw?" He says, "Yeah." I said, What do you like?" Scary things. He said, "Can I draw scary things?" I said, "Sure." He says, "Will you draw me a spider?" And I drew him a furry tarantula, a little spider or a widow of some sort, and I handed it to him, and it just made his day. And I think that what you see in what Chuck's saying, there's a lot of truth. It's like, wow, I'm thinking about how cool would it have been just to have this pastoral knowledge with some of the parents who are stuck to say, what if you get at their emotions through art? And that is a perfect connection. So I really appreciate this.
Boy, I'm glad to hear that.
You can find out more about Novi, by the way, that website, novi.ngo. Find out what they're doing around the world, especially in Ukraine. Novi is NOVI.NGO as a non-governmental organization, novi.ngo. What does Novi stand for? What does it mean? What is it?
It means new.
Okay.
And so this is a new venture, a new work, and a new way of being in the world for others in the name of Christ.
Yeah.
Mm. That's beautiful. You know, I sent Phil a quick text and said, hey, what was the number of people that came through your church? He just sent me back 25,303.
Wow.
25,303.
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah.
Well, God bless them.
And you know, it was so cool too. You know, the government kind of came in and, you know, they're looking for people in the area. And they had been down at the border, ministering at the border. And they just struck up conversation with some of the officials. And then they said, hey, well, you know, we just on their own initiative, they were taking people to the church. So they told them what they were doing. And the government's like, hey, could we jump in on this? You know, wow. So that's how those massive numbers ended up going through there. You know, Chuck, I was thinking about when you were talking about the trauma of these children. And, you know, we've had a ton, you know, I don't know if you know, but we've had like 30 churches in the Ukraine. So we've had a ton of interaction. We've raised $500,000 to send into the Ukraine because of the relationships that we've had. But this trauma is just so radical and it's so real. But I was thinking as you were describing it, I was thinking how we can become so detached from that. And even, you know, people like our age where we're so far removed from even our childhood, you know, you don't remember anything. But as you were saying it, I was thinking, I was remembering when I was a kid living in L.A., and I remember the Watts riots. And I wasn't, you know, I mean, they were 20 miles away maybe, but just the anxiety at maybe, what was I, maybe like 8 or 9 years old, of knowing all of that chaos was going on, you know, not too far away. I remember the stress. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but I just remember being fearful and living in constant fear that that's going to just bleed right over into where we are, you know. And so, I mean, talk about living in a war zone continually.
Yeah.
The devastation, like you're saying, the impact that has on a little nervous system. Wow.
That's right.
That is so. And things like your friend is doing, I mean, this stuff is literally life-saving. Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, I think what Phil did represents a partnership of church and government. Mm-hmm. You know, rather than, you know, the separation of church and state. In this instance, here's a positive that's a win-win.
Yeah.
And, you know, and also the idea that Jesus leads us to participate in being a healing agent or a helpful agent in the crisis is, you know, so that's why I love Steve. I love what he's doing and, you know, and want to help. I want to see it, you know, financed and blessed and move even further. I mean, a day is coming, I hope in the not too distant future, when they'll be poking their noses into Gaza and also into Lebanon. Because, you know, in Lebanon especially, the bombing in, you know, major cities, it's, I know a woman who grew up in Lebanon in the early conflicts involving Israel and Hezbollah, or within Beirut itself, the three factions of, you know, different ethnic or religious groups that were there. And she remembers her child, and she's still traumatized by it today.
Yeah, we, like I said, we were in Cyprus a couple of weeks ago, and there was a family that came from Lebanon, from the southern part, and from basically a place that was getting, you know, kind of blown to bits. And it was interesting. I'd never met him before. The guy was a Druze, actually, you know, born and raised in Syria, but ended up in, you know, as a believer, ended up in Lebanon serving the Lord and trying to help the people. But, you know, he was talking to us about just the devastation of the people, but yet at the same time, interestingly, said there was also an underlying hope that maybe, because Hezbollah has been such an oppressive force in Lebanon, he said, he said, nobody will say it out loud, but the hope is that these guys will be defeated and driven out, and we can actually have our country and our lives back. So I thought, wow.
Yeah, I'm not sure that people know. I mean, now my dad followed Mideastern politics and what was going on there very closely. Yeah. And I'm not sure that a lot of people know that Hezbollah is not native to Lebanon.
Right, exactly.
And a lot of their sponsorship has come from Russia.
Yeah.
But this is, Syria's incursion into, into these areas because they hate Israel so much.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So look, did you pull that up?
I did. This is a video. Phil Metzger, whom we're talking about, was on NBC News when he was doing this down at Calvary San Diego. He got to meet Lester Holt. And the video's still up there. If you do a search for NBC Phil Metzger, that's what I did. And I found the video of the interview.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
That's great. Well, speaking of your dad, it's not, I mean, of course, Cheryl and I do this program every Friday, and, inevitably something will come up, some question or something, and she'll reference her dad. And so, but, we haven't had a conversation on this program in a long, long time. So it's been just, what has it been now, 11 years?
11.
Yeah, since Dad went to be with the Lord. Any kind of current reflections, anything, I mean, obviously he's your dad, so you're going to think about him like other people wouldn't, but has there been any just sort of fresh, fond memories or anything?
Well, yeah, there are memories all the time, but I've had several what I would call significant dreams.
Yeah.
Most of my dreams are just, the Three Stooges. It's it's just nonsense. There's no plot line. It's just goofiness. But I've had a couple of dreams, and one of them I think you'll appreciate. In my dream, I was at a conference center in a ballroom where it was set up for a seminar, and I was with Dad, and this guy ran up to him breathlessly and said, "Oh, Pastor Chuck, everything at Calvary Chapel is just going crazy right now. It's all falling apart. It's all a big mess. There's all this confusion." And I'm just standing there. I'm thinking, uh-oh, Dad's going to run out of here. He's going to run to the office. He's going to, start cracking the whip and straightening things out. And I'm watching my dad, and he's not responding at all. He's looking around, and he just walks away very calmly, interested in something else. And I thought, he's in heaven. He's like,
yeah.
One other dream, now that I remember it, is I met up with him, and I know that it was heaven because I'm with him, and it's like he's showing me around, but it was more like an auto parts store or something like that.
Well, that was in heaven.
Hey. Yeah, well, that's the thing. So there are all these different brand new gadgets and things, and he's walking me around and showing me these bins and saying, "See this? Look what they've got now. This is," and it was his excitement of being there, and sharing that with me, and now I'm not placing any spiritual significance in these dreams.
Yeah,
I'm just comforted by him.
Yeah,
that's Dad. That's how he'd be.
Yeah. And Cheryl has similar kinds of things. She goes, "Oh, last night I dreamt I was with Mom and Dad, and we were doing this, and it's all like, we were visiting. We were going through this open house at a house, and Dad was saying, I want to change the kitchen around and stuff like that."
Our guest on Pastor's Perspective today is Chuck Smith Jr., and we welcome your phone calls, 888-564-6173. Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway are here too, and we would love to hear from you at 888-564-6173. And again, to find out more about the Helping Hands exhibit, go to our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com, and click Events. We'll be back. We're back on Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Biola University, ranked as the most comprehensively Christian university in North America. You can find out more about them at biola.edu. My name is Brian Perez, and we have a special guest in the studio with us today. It's Chuck Smith Jr. He is joining Pastor Brian Broderson and me in the studio. We've got Bobby Conway, the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's back home right now, but he was here last week, so you guys could have met. That would have been great. But some other time, I guess, right? 888-564-6173 is the number to call. Oh, and really quick, I don't know if you've read this book. It's Chuck Smith's A Memoir of Grace as Told to Chuck Smith Jr. So definitely pick this up. You can find out more information about it at thewordfortoday.org.
That's a great book.
Yes.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I remember when it first came out.
It's got pictures in it, too.
Yeah.
Some black and whites right in the middle.
You know, my favorite part, honestly, I mean, all the stories and stuff obviously are great. But I really, at the end of the book where you're asking, you guys are maybe in a conversation or he's addressing kind of the, sort of the success of the ministry, the breadth of the ministry and so forth. And kind of asking like, well, how did that happen? And what, sort of what did you do, Chuck? And he said, I really didn't do anything except I didn't say no to people. I gave people permission and just let God do what he wanted to do in their lives. And I thought, man, that is it.
Yes.
Right there, I mean, so many people trying to control everybody, so many, church leaders trying to control ministries and things like that. And I think what a great lesson, just set people free and let them do what God, like your friend, like you're talking about.
Right.
I mean, somebody might have told him, you can't do that.
Right.
But thank God he did it anyway.
You see someone on fire for God, don't put the fire out.
Right.
If they've got energy and they're willing to make sacrifices.
Yes.
Encourage
that. And trust the Lord for the details. He'll get it sorted out for them.
That's right.
But what if they make a mistake?
Well, then they're cut
It
off.
happens.
They're cut off.
My mistakes have been a great education for me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the truth, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So, Bobby, I was just curious, coming from where you were down in South County, did you ever cross paths with Chuck? I mean, maybe you guys never met, but did you ever, back in those days, because you lived somewhere down in that area, right?
Yeah, Laguna Niguel, Mission Viejo. So as a new Christian, and what would that have been, 93, I definitely remember hearing about Chuck. I think, if I'm not mistaken, weren't you pastoring in San Clemente, Chuck?
In Dana Point,
In Dana Point, okay. Yeah, but I definitely remember hearing about you all the time in those early years. And so it's a pleasure to be able to sit on the program with you, bro.
Same here.
888-564-6173. Let's take a phone call. Here's Eliana calling us from San Diego. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Eliana.
Hi, pastors. Thank you for taking my call. I just have a question. I just had one of my childhood friends just pass away. He was dealing with a lot of mental issues, some drug use, some alcohol use. Also, there was some custody battles with his ex-wife. He took his life last week, and I'm on the way to the Rosary right now, and I don't know if I should go. I know our faith, frowns against, taking your own life. I don't know if I should go because it is a Rosary and it's Catholic. And also, how do I consult the family? Like, what do I say? I can't say, like, oh, he's in heaven, he's with Christ, I don't know that. I'm conflicted. I'm on the fence of even going. I'm just not sure what to do or what to say and how to say it.
And you say you don't know if he's in heaven because of the Catholic belief about suicide?
No. I say that because he has taken his own life. He committed suicide. He used the gun and he took out his own life. So I don't know if he's in heaven. I mean, is he in heaven? I mean, if he took his life?
Well, Okay, there's a few things here, so let's kind of walk through this one at a time. Number one, yes, you should go to that rosary and just be there as a support and just be there, just to love people, hug people, and you don't have to say anything. Don't feel like you have to come in and set the record straight. Like, well, I don't know if he's in heaven or not. Don't even worry about any of that. So often when somebody, whatever the cause of death is, we do feel like we want to say something, and sometimes we're well, I've got to say something, and then we might say stuff that later we think, oh gosh, why in the world did I say that? It just wasn't the right thing at the time. And so just know that your presence and your love, that will speak volumes in and of itself. Regarding whether or not your friend is in heaven, I mean, that is all connected back to his relationship with Jesus. If he had a relationship with Jesus, then he's in heaven, even if he took his life. That does not exclude you from going, to be with the Lord. Some people navigate difficulties through life and trust the Lord in ways that they survive these kinds of things, and other people don't. And it doesn't mean they weren't believers. It just means that they were weak and maybe at that moment, and then tragically, this is what happens. But you can rest if he knew the Lord. You can rest in the fact that he's safe with Jesus. You guys got any comments?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. The only thing is, I always thought that if you're taking your life, it's murder, and
Well, that is a Catholic teaching. I don't know how strongly the church holds to it today, but that was, I was raised Catholic, so I remember like suicide, you had venial sins and you had mortal sins. And murder, of course, was a mortal sin. And suicide was also because you were murdering yourself, is kind of the way it was expressed. But I don't think that biblically you can support that. But Chuck, you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say, Eliana, take a deep breath and relax. The Lord is with you. God's Spirit is going to guide you. I agree with Brian that it would be good for you to be there, but you're there for your friend. You're there as a presence, representing your love for him and your concern. And you don't have to engage the service or worry about, you're not there for the service as it unfolds. You're there for your friend. On the other hand, if you listen closely to the liturgy that goes on there, you'll hear scripture, you'll hear some very rich prayers, and you'll hear prayers appropriate to the loss that the family is sustaining. And that can be edifying, even though it's from a different tradition than our own Protestant tradition. And like Brian said, you don't have to say anything. And I'm telling you, it's much, much better to weep with those who weep, as Paul said, than it is to try to figure out what you can say. Brian and I have performed, and Bob have performed a lot of funerals. We don't like to say funeral. We want to say a memorial service or a celebration of life, but it all comes down to the same thing. We've lost this person and it hurts. And I've heard so many lame comments. They're in a better place. Well, it was God's will that they leave at this time. That doesn't help at all. And the worst that's just about become a slogan today is, I'm sorry for your loss. And you can say, I'm very sorry, or I'm terribly sorry, but it all comes down to, I don't know what to say, so I'm going to say a cliche. Don't do that. It's not necessary. If you just say, I'm here, by being there, and maybe if you know a family member well enough to, put your hand on their shoulder or take their hand, that's plenty. If they see a tear in your eye, that is plenty. You're saying everything that needs to be said. You're a child of Christ who's there as someone who loved and who suffers the loss. and the Lord Jesus is with you, and He'll be very pleased with you, pleased to use you just as a presence there.
Bobby, I want to get your thoughts. Something Brian just said, and Chuck agreed that it's not up to Eliana to come into the service tonight. And first of all, she doesn't have to pray the rosary, right? She can go to the rosary. It doesn't mean that she has to pray it or anything, but it's not up to her to say anything. But at the same time, these are people that are grieving. They're in a room, and the subject might come up. So what if somebody does ask Eliana, do you think he's in heaven? I mean, Eliana's not the one that's going to say anything, but what if she gets asked the question?
Yeah, that's a tough spot when you're feeling confusion. But I think that what the guy said is great. And, one other thing you could say as well is, I'm hurting with you. It's obvious that you are. And so that just lets them know that you're in a place of empathy. I think you could say, if you got asked that question, I recognize how tragic this is. And I also respect the church that I'm in. And I have maybe a different view on this. I think that there's only one unforgiven sin. It's the unpardonable sin. And even though he took his life, and that is murder of self, if he is a believer, then let's just rest in that, because ultimately we don't know. But if he believed in Jesus and he got empty, and then even just try to give some perspective, because sometimes people feel angry when somebody takes their life, and I can understand that for sure. But sometimes people really were just in such agony, they didn't know how to go on any longer. They're just at the absolute end of themselves. And the only people that know that are the people that have been to that edge and didn't pull the trigger. And so if you haven't been to that edge, it's hard for people to understand how someone can do that. But once you've been to the edge and you thought about jumping, and for some reason you didn't, you have a lot of empathy for those that take their life. Because it's not like they took their life because they were feeling joy and they were happy. There was an emptiness. And so, I think that's just an opportunity to say, I'm just sad about how empty he was, and wish we could have known how to reach out better, and wish comfort would have came. And it just makes me want to think more about those who are depressed, and let's let good come out of it in that way. Maybe something like that.
Chuck?
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful, Bob. It almost sounds like you're someone who's been close enough to the edge to have that kind of empathy.
I set a date to jump and didn't, so.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
My dad was such an optimist that he never came close to anything like that. He loved every day of his life. And I haven't. I'm more like my mom. And she had those days where I know that she thought about, if the Lord would just take me today, I'd be really happy with that. To understand when a person comes to a place of such despair and desperation that they want to exit, that's something that we mourn, not just how they left, but those causes to do that. And love reaches out and says, I understand, or I forgive, or I care.
Yeah, and I think just kind of finalize with Eliana. Eliana, just like we're saying, just go to the service and just be a presence there, and the Lord's with you. And I doubt that anybody's going to even ask you, like, well, where do you think he is, or any of that. I mean, if there was anything that was said, and I wouldn't even think, even though Catholicism has a different view on it, I don't think anybody's going to get up and say that at this point. So you probably don't even need to worry about that.
We have a potential audience of millions of people listening right now. Undoubtedly, there's a few who might be contemplating ending their life. I mean, we're right around holiday season. The past 4 or 5 years have just been crazy nuts in this world, in this country. But what do you tell somebody to how not to go? I mean, if they're at the edge right now, not to go over.
Yeah. Well, you just try to help them to see that, there is hope, that even though it doesn't seem like there is, there really is. And of course, with the Lord, there's always hope, and God's able. And yes, I talked to a guy today whose daughter a few weeks ago tried to take her life, and we were talking about that today, and he's still just so shook up over it, and just crying out to the Lord daily. She's very confused and so forth, and this is just really, really challenging stuff. So I think really you're just presenting the grace of God, the goodness of God, the plan of God. God actually has a plan, and even though when you're in a state like that, you can't really see that. That's the problem, right? So somehow, just trying to help people see that, I know it's hard to see. Before I came in here, I was talking with a friend who's battling with some pretty intense anxiety, and we've had this conversation before. He's battled with this before, and I just said, just remember the deliverances that God has brought you, and just know that He'll bring you through this one too.
Yeah, Bobby.
I would say a word to those that have people in their life that are like that, in that place. Sometimes when somebody's in a suicidal state, you can get friends or parents or spouses, and they don't want to hear because they can't handle it. And I realize that's a tall order, but as a father who's walked his son through the dark night of the soul, I am so thankful to where my son is. But I mean, when I think about where he has been, but there was a time I would have said, there is no more tortured soul that I know than my own son. It was agonizing to watch him go through his depression. And there were many moments where I lived in a ton of fear, but I just remember telling him, son, I want you to know something. It does overwhelm me. I feel helpless when you're in that place, but you always have access to my heart, because if you're in that place and I can help do something about it, God forbid that I make my emotions and the inability to handle where you are to cause you to not think I would be there for you. And so sometimes you can have people in your life that are going through so much mental health stuff, and you just wish you could snap a finger and you just wish that they would get better. But remember that it's not just about their trial, it's about our trial. And God wants to do things in all of our life. And what He gave my son and myself out of that is he also had, as an old man who suffers from depression from time to time in a horrific way. And if I was ever in an empty spot, we can be there for each other. I mean, and that's a meaningful thing. Like, he's seen me, and it's embarrassing when you're going to a space like that in front of your son. But guess what? There's not a lot of people that can handle that, but my boy can. And you know what? I'll take any resource when I'm in that low spot, because there's so many people that just think you feel isolated, you feel warped. And I mean, the courage it would take for somebody to say, I'm so suicidal right now, I feel like I need to be hospitalized. If somebody had the guts to say that, we absolutely need to see that as courageous, because you know that when they're worried about stigma of being in the hospital about that. So just realize that if you feel like it's hard for you, well, you're probably not the one wanting to take a gun to your head. So let's set aside our emotions and minister to the one who might.
Yeah. Chuck?
I think first of all, is not what do you say. I think first of all, listen. Show them that you're willing to listen, that you want to listen. So, well, why do you feel that way? Explain that to me, because, I see you have so much to live for, but I'm not seeing it through your eyes. So talk to me about that, and allow them to talk about it, and try not to be shocked with what and if you are shocked, just say, well, I'm shocked by that. Give me a second to compose myself.
That's good.
Try not to rush into easy answers or, what would work for you, but just listen to them. And then as you listen to them, see what comes up that you feel you can address thoughtfully and lovingly without necessarily giving advice. Well, you should do this, you should do that, you should just pray, you should just have faith. Beware of treating it too lightly and thoughtlessly. If you're in over your head, get help. Talk to your pastor, talk to a therapist, get help and tell your friend, I want to walk with you through this, and I'll find resources if that's okay for you. If someone who's depressed is and on the edge and they're willing to talk about it, you're blessed, because a lot of people hide their depression, especially when they approach suicide. They make their plans, they don't tell anyone, and that's why so often it comes as a complete shock. And Bob, I really love your response. I just think, that empathy that comes from knowing is such a wonderful bond that you and your son have. And I just believe that God's blessed that.
And kind of like Bobby, like you said a minute ago, unless you've been on that edge, and it doesn't have to be that you've necessarily been suicidal, but maybe you've been in a depression that is so deep that you can't even imagine that you would ever come out of it and be normal again. It does create in you a whole different perspective when you meet a person, in that place. Where you're just like, okay, like the typical, hey, well, just snap out of it. You're just like, I would love to snap out of it. I would do nothing more than to snap right out of this. I can't snap out of it. That's the problem. So, but great to have this conversation today with three guys who have lived through depression. So, kind of helpful.
I laugh. Oh, geez.
But thank God for the moment. We're doing okay. But on line 3, Brian, there's a caller, and he says he's a friend of mine and Chuck's, and he's not lying. He is a friend, but I don't think either one of us have heard from him in decades.
It's been a while, and a church planter too, here in the States and also in Russia.
Yes.
So, Bob, what have you been up to?
Hi, guys.
Bob Dietz, my goodness.
Yeah, it's me.
So good to see your name up here.
Brian, I listen to Pastor's Perspective real regular.
Is that right? Wow, that is great.
You know what we've been through. Without a lot of detail, Kay is in a really bad place.
Oh.
I'm reading now. My wife's name is Rosie. But I still have 3 kids, from Kay and the whole family thing. And, just ask you to pray for her, because she's had, she's been through mental health issues, from way back to where, after we left Russia, at one point she just up and left me. And again, I don't want to go through a lot of details, and I went through a 16-year backslide, basically, and it was bitterness, bitterness and resentment. And God was gracious to me. I mean, I became a social worker for Child Protective Services, and kind of got my, way of dealing with end of my career. I have a way to, take care of myself financially. But, and again, she was just hospitalized again. Brian, what we went through with you, and I have long since let all that go.
Yeah.
I'm with Brad Lambert.
All right. That's great, Bob. Well, it's good to hear your voice, and we'll pray for Kay for sure.
Thanks for calling in today, Bob. We have run out of time on today's program. Our special guest, Chuck Smith, and Chuck Smith Jr. If you want to know more information about the Helping Hands exhibit that's going on this Sunday in San Clemente, go to our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com, and click events. Also, on the topic that we were just discussing a few minutes ago, maybe you're somebody who has no one to talk to, nobody to confide in. There is now a number that you can call to talk to somebody. It's 988. It's just like 911, but it's 988. It's a mental health crisis hotline that you can call anytime. And that's it. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Biola University, ranked as the most comprehensively Christian university in North America.